It was the kind of road you'd see in an old ghost story, the one no one dared drive after sunset. Locals called it Black Hollow Lane, a name whispered in warning by those who remembered the tales. But for as long as she could remember, Alice Morgan had scoffed at such nonsense. So when her GPS rerouted her down Black Hollow Lane on her way home from a late shift, she didn't think twice. It was already past midnight, and she wasn't about to waste another half hour driving the long way around. She wasn't some scared little kid afraid of the dark. It was a road, plain and simple. Trees, gravel, pavement, nothing more. Still, as the long stretch of forest swallowed her headlights, her confidence began to waver. The trees were dense, blackened silhouettes against a gray autumn sky. Their skeletal branches clawed toward one another overhead, forming a tunnel that seemed to close in around her. The air felt thicker here, pressing against the windows of her car, and the only sound was the tires crunching over loose gravel. Alice turned up the radio to drown out the silence. Static. She frowned and fiddled with the dial, but no matter how many times she spun through the stations, there was nothing but that faint, white hiss. She checked her phone next. No signal. Typical, she thought, shaking her head. Alice gasped and slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt. Her heart pounded as she gripped the wheel, staring wide-eyed at the figure. As if this shortcut wasn't creepy enough already. She was about to toss the phone onto the passenger seat when something appeared on the road just ahead. A figure, pale and slender, standing motionless in the beam of her headlights. A girl. She couldn't have been more than 10 or 12 years old, wearing a white dress that looked almost too bright against the shadows of the forest. Her hair was long and dark, falling in tangled waves around her face. Alice rolled down the window reluctantly, leaning out into the cool night air. "Hey, are you okay?" No answer. Panic surged through Alice as a strange chill seeped into her bones. She reached for the gear shift, ready to reverse and get out of there, but froze when the girl raised a hand. Her pale fingers pointed behind Alice, toward the woods she'd just driven through. "Don't look." The words appeared in Alice's mind, unbidden yet insistent. Don't look. But the pull was impossible to ignore. Slowly, against every screaming instinct, she turned her head. At first, she saw nothing, only the yawning darkness of the forest, her taillights casting faint crimson pools on the undergrowth. But as her eyes adjusted, shapes began to solidify. Faces, dozens of them, pale and featureless, half hidden among the trees. They weren't watching her, not exactly. Their heads faced her direction, but there were no eyes, no mouths, just smooth stretches of skin where features should have been. Then they moved, not toward her, not at first. The shapes glided through the woods, their unnatural motions making no sound, no disturbance among the leaves or twigs. But as they shifted, they seemed to draw closer, pencil-thin limbs stretching toward the edge of the road, as though testing its boundary. The girl stepped forward again, closer this time. She was almost at Alice's bumper now. Alice tore her gaze away from the woods. Don't look, and slammed her car into reverse. Her tires spun uselessly for a moment before finally gripping the gravel. Alice shifted back into drive, the panic twisting through her chest like a clenched fist. She didn't care if the girl needed help. She didn't care if it made her a coward. She needed to leave. Now. The car squealed as she hit the gas, surging past the girl and back onto solid pavement. She didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. Each mile she drove, the knot in her chest loosened slightly, but the forest on both sides of her seemed endless, stretching on, with no sign of the road opening up. And then her headlights began to dim. "No," she whispered, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "No, not now." The yellow glow faded to a sickly orange, then red, before flickering out completely. Darkness swallowed the car, and Alice's heartbeat roared in her ears as her foot slammed on the brake again. She stabbed at her phone, but the screen wouldn't turn on, no matter how hard she jabbed the power button. Everything, her car, her electronics, had gone completely dead, and in the silence, she heard it. A single knock. It came from the driver's side window, soft but deliberate, like the tap of fingers against glass. Alice squeezed her eyes shut. Don't look. The knock came again, harder this time, closer, and then another, on the passenger side glass, then on the windshield, then from the back of the car. It was everywhere, surrounding her, growing louder and more insistent with each passing second. Her chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. The knocking turned to pounding, and her fingers moved to the door locks as if on instinct. She clicked them shut, too late. The knob twisted on her door, once, then twice. The door didn't open, but Alice felt it. Something or someone was now inside. Something cold brushed her shoulder. Her scream cut the silence, but the forest swallowed the sound, just as it had swallowed everything else. The road remained empty, her car silently stalled at the center of Black Hollow Lane. No one would find her, not here, and the knocking didn't stop.